This right here, this is the new AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D, brand new from AMD, launched on November 7th, 2024. Hello, fellow gamers and hardware enthusiasts. My name is Brent Justice, and welcome to the FPS Reviews YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to go over all of our benchmarks from our written review. That means productivity and gaming benchmarks. I'm going to show you that and talk about our results and our overall summary from our review. I do suggest, though, checking out our full written review, link below, as it has all the details about this new CPU, what makes it new, why it's so special, and goes into more detail about all of the benchmarks with percentages and our analysis and a full conclusion as well. So make sure to check that out in the link below. But let's quickly talk about this CPU before we jump into the benchmarks. So this new CPU was launched at a $479 MSRP. So that is technically $30 above the previous generation Ryzen 7 7800X3D. The Ryzen 7 7800X3D based on the Zen 4 architecture, the 9800X3D based on the Zen 5 architecture. Also, the cache has been flipped. The extra 64 megabytes of L3 cache you get on the CCD is now positioned underneath the CCD instead of on top previously. What this allows is the cores to boost higher because thermals are no longer such a huge issue on the CPU. With the cache underneath, the cores have more direct contact with the IHS, and therefore they can be boosted higher and they can sustain a higher boost clock for longer periods of time. This is very important because it affects not only gaming performance, but also productivity performance as well. Single core and multi-threading performance increases also. The 9800X3D is still an 8-core 16-thread CPU, similar to the 7800X3D. The cache size is the same. That means it has an extra 64 megabytes of L3 cache in addition to the shared L3 already on it. That gives it 96 megabytes of total L3 cache. The base clock has been increased all the way up to 4.7 gigahertz versus 4.2 on the 7800X3D. And importantly, the boost clock has been increased to 5.2 versus 5 gigahertz on the 7800X3D. The TDP is still 120 watts, which is the same as the 7800X3D. But what's important is that because these cores can boost higher for longer, it will actually hit a higher power target than it was previously. It is now actually able to use that power headroom available and run up to that 120 watts of power and actually utilize it, whereas the 7800X3D was not able to do that before because it could not maintain those boost clocks for as long. So the 9800X3D is looking quite special on paper for not just gaming performance, but also productivity performance over a 7800X3D. So in our benchmarks, I want to focus on a balanced overall look at the 9800X3D. That means we are going to have a lot of system benchmarks and benchmarks that focus on multi-threading and single-core, single-threading performance advantages, because we want to see if that truly has been improved with the 9800X3D. Of course, we have games included as well. In the future, we plan to have many more games. We're going to do some more gaming-focused reviews where we have nothing but a 20 game roundup. But for this initial review, we wanted to show a balance of productivity and what you can actually get out of this as you do more things on your computer besides just gaming, but also gaming performance. And we do have several games in here for gaming performance as well. So this is just a first initial launch review, so we can cover all aspects of the CPU, and we will have more focused review later on. I am quickly going to put up our system test page right here, and you can see how our systems are set up for this benchmark. Of note, a new BIOS was issued with the launch of this CPU. It has an A at the end of it. That BIOS was used for all of our X3D CPUs in this review. So the 7950X3D, the 7800X3D, and the 9800X3D were all tested on this same BIOS. Look for new BIOSes when you install this CPU yourself. The new BIOS is not required for the CPU to boot up, but the A at the end does have optimizations for X3D CPUs, so make sure to install that latest BIOS if you are installing this yourself. Otherwise, that's the system specs, and now it's time to go into benchmarks, and let's start with productivity. In our first benchmark, we'll look at PCMark 10. This is an overall system benchmark. This focuses on lightly threaded applications, light workloads. Think of office-type workloads like Word or Excel. These are things that you typically do on your computer besides just gaming. We all use our computer for more than gaming, so these kind of benchmarks are important. The first thing you'll notice is how much faster the 9800X3D is versus the 7800X3D from the previous generation. We are seeing a 9% performance increase with the 9800X3D. We also see that it matches performance with the 9700X. This is important because the 9700X is also an 8-core, 16-thread CPU from the Zen 5 generation that the 9800X3D is based on. And we can see that they are very similar in performance. That means you are not losing performance with the 9800X3D in productivity, whereas with the 7800X3D, it most certainly was. You were sacrificing productivity performance for gaming performance. With the 9800X3D, you don't have to. We also see it is well ahead of the latest generation from Intel Arrow Lake, the 285K and 245K. This is much faster. It's also 3% faster than a 14900K, which was a powerful productivity processor as well. Let's move on to Geekbench 6. This is the multi-core test. Once again, how impressive the 9800X3D is over the 7800X3D using all cores. We see that the 9800X3D is 20% faster. That's right, 20% faster in multi-core performance versus the 7800X3D. Now, both CPUs have the same core count, 8 cores, 16 threads. 9800X3D, however, 20% faster than the previous generation 7800X3D. That's very large. That puts it faster than the 245K, and that puts it at 12% faster, in fact, than the 9700X. That's also impressive, again, considering same core count, same thread count. 9800X3D is beating the 9700X by 12%. And over the 245K, it's about 3.4%. That's very impressive. Now let's look at single core performance. This is where the 7800X3D suffered the most. Single core performance. Even though it was great for gaming, its single core performance was still lower because of clock speed. No longer the case with the 9800X3D. We see that the 9800X3D is 20% faster in single threading, single core performance than the 7800X3D. 20%. That also puts it on par with the 9700X on single core performance, and about 3% faster than even the 285K, the latest generation CPU from Intel. Looking at 3DMark, this is a max threads test. Now, the way this one works is a little different than Geekbench. Geekbench has a varied set of tests that it runs. 3DMark is a single workload that it runs, and it can utilize all the cores that a CPU has. So this max thread test will naturally look better on the CPUs that have more cores. And that's what we see here. However, even with that said, check out how well the 9800X3D is doing over the 7800X3D with the same cores, 23% faster. That's right, same cores, same number of cores, 23% faster with the 9800X3D versus the 7800X3D. That's impressive. And in fact, it's 12% faster than the 9700X. Again, same cores, but 12% faster. Impressive. When we look at the single core performance, we see that replicated again. The 9800X3D is 26% faster than the 7800X3D. This is where you can see the 7800X3D really did suffer on the single core performance. Well, 9800X3D fixes that. We are getting a 26% performance increase over the previous generation. That's huge, folks. That's huge. The 9800X3D is also a little bit slower than the 9700X here in the single core. So in the previous test, it was very on par with performance a lot of the time. This one, it's a little bit slower, but we're only talking about a 5% difference. So that's not huge. But yeah, some workloads, it could be a little bit slower than the 9700X, but not a lot. In the multi-core, it's definitely faster. Now, the real impressive part here is, again, just how much better this is over the previous generation. That's a generational improvement. You can't argue with that. In Cinebench R23, we are getting into the rendering performance. And again, this benchmark obviously favors more cores. However, again, it is impressive because we see the 9800X3D 24% faster than the 7800X3D. That's right, 24% faster. Same cores, same number of cores, 24% faster. And over the 9700X, just as I was mentioning, again, 16% faster. And that is with the multi-threading, same amount of cores and threads. So yeah, maybe it was a little bit slower at times on the single core compared to the 9700X, but when it comes to the multi-core, we are getting consistent benchmarks showing it faster than the 9700X. Now, looking at single core and Cinebench, it's actually a little bit of a different story here. We've got a 15%, pretty big over the 7800X3D, and we still see the same, about 5% slower with the 9700X. But that gain over the 7800X3D is just so impressive. I mean, you can't deny that. Now, moving on to Blender. This one, of course, is going to be very multi-core heavy, lots of cores, lots of threads. It likes that. We see the 9800X3D is 23% faster than the 7800X3D and 20% faster than the 9700X. So yes, in a couple of benchmarks, the single core performance is lower, but when you put all the cores going in action at the same time, it does beat the 9700X quite well, in fact. So the 9800X3D is just faster than the 9700X for multi-core stuff. When we go to the next benchmark, it's much of the same, 23% again with the 9800X3D over the 7800X3D, and then 14% over the 9700X. And then once again, 23% here with 18% over the 9700X. So all of the Blender benchmarks are about 23% performance advantage with the 9800X3D over the 7800X3D. And then we are saying just around 20% advantage over the 9700X, and that is consistent. VRAY, we again see the 9800X3D well over the 7800X3D, but this time by a whopping 35%. That's right, 35% higher in VRAY. That's huge. And over the 9700X, that is 18%. So when you look at these benchmarks, I mean, it's just such a great improvement. Now, HandBrake, that's all about transcoding. We're transcoding video on the CPU here. Can you save more time with the 9800X3D? And the answer is yes. About a 14% average savings in time with the 9800X3D versus the 7800X3D and the 9700X. So that's right. It is actually faster for this in HandBrake doing transcoding video on the 9800X3D versus the 9700X. Now let's check out gaming performance. Okay, now let's jump into the gaming performance. All gaming is tested at 1080p with a GeForce RTX 4090. We are using the highest quality presets in all of these games, and we are using manual run-throughs in every game. No benchmarks are used. These are all manual in-game run-throughs. Already previously, the Ryzen 7 7800X3D was the king in performance. It and the 7950X3D did lead the charts in everything. There was just no game where they were not the fastest thing, right? Well, the new AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D tops even that. No joke, every game, it tops the previous fastest CPU for gaming. So starting here in Alan Wake 2, the 9800X3D over the previous 7800X3D is 6% faster. That doesn't sound like a lot, but keep in mind how much faster the 7800X3D already was compared to all the other CPUs on this graph. It was already in a league of its own. So the fact that the 9800 X3D can push that even 6% further is just amazing. Absolutely amazing. So that's and it'll probably widen as we come across faster GPUs in the faster. And that's something we'll talk about as well. The 9800 X3D over the 9700X, 24% faster. The 9800 X3D over the 14900K, 16% faster. And it's 28% faster over the 285K, the fastest that Arrow Lake can perform in this game. The 9800 X3D is 28% faster than that. Absolutely just amazing. We come to Black Myth Wukong. Now, this game is a little bit of a special case. This is not the best game for testing CPUs, even at the 1080p. We set the game to 1080p for the desktop and the game, so it definitely was running at 1080p. But and the fact that we're also using a manual in-game run-through, so all the physics and AI are calculated in that. It's not the benchmark. But even with all of that, this game really is very GPU dependent. We are probably going to have to lower the game settings to see the CPUs stand out a little more at the cinematic quality. Performance is very similar between all these CPUs. So we'll probably have to lower this to high or medium settings to get some kind of difference shown there. But even with this and what it's showing, you can still see the pattern that is a common pattern through all of our gaming benchmarks here. The 9800 X3D is on top. This 7800 X3D is on top. And we see the Intel CPU, especially the Arrow Lake CPUs, well, they're on the bottom. And yes, the results are very close, but there is still a very clear pattern from this that you can discern. But let's go to the next game. Cyberpunk 2077, everybody's favorite game / benchmark. Again, another huge win for the 9800 X3D over the 7800 X3D. That is a 9% performance advantage, 9%. The 9800 X3D over the 9700X is a 33%. And remember, these are similar cores and threads. So it's all about that L3 cache here, 33%. The 9800 X3D over the 14900K, which was, a very fast CPU from Intel for gaming anyway, it is 35% faster. That's right, 35% faster. And then if we compare it to the new 285K, 44% faster. The 9800 X3D is 44% faster than the 285K. Moving on to Dying Light, this game also shows it real well. The 9800 X3D over the 7800 X3D is 15% faster in this game. 15, so that's higher than the previous games we saw so far. This is the largest difference we've seen. 15% faster. The 9800 X3D over the 9700X is 45% faster. And then over the 14900K, also 45% faster. Absolutely amazing. Hogwarts Legacy. Another game that definitely stresses the CPUs. We are running in the Hogsmeade area, which is a great area for showing CPU differences, a lot of AI and NPC things going on there. In Hogwarts Legacy, this is the largest difference that we saw in this review. The 9800 X3D over the 7800 X3D is a 25% performance advantage. 25%. That is just huge. 9800 X3D over the 9700X, 53%. I mean, these are, remember, similar core and thread count CPUs, both based on the Zen 5 architecture, but yet the 9800 X3D is 53% faster than it, all due to that L3 cache. And then over the 14900K, it's 34% faster. And yeah, just what can you say about that? Over the 285K, 13%. 285K on the best performance profile did a little bit better here. But if you run the balance profile, which is the same that all the other CPUs are run at, then it's very, very poor. So huge difference just depending on the power profile you're running for Arrow Lake there. Horizon Forbidden West. The 9800 X3D is 6% over the 7800 X3D and 18% over the 9700X. And then we actually do see Arrow Lake and the Intel CPUs do a little bit better here in this game. It's not as severe of an issue in this game, but we still see the 9800X3D is 13% faster than the 285K at its best performance. So still the leader. 9800X3D in Starfield does really well over the 7800X3D. That is a 14% improvement over the 9700X, a 34% improvement, and over the 285K, a 19% improvement. This is another game that Intel CPUs often do well in as well. 285 actually did kind of okay, but still the 9800X3D is 19% faster. Finally, The Last of Us Part 1, we again see the 9800X3D over the 7800X3D by 9%, over the 9700X by 23%, and over the 14900K and 285K by 14%. A clear pattern throughout all of the games, you can say. All right, let's look at power and temperature. All right, so why is the Ryzen 7 9800X3D doing so well in, well, multi-threading performance especially, compared to the 9700X or the 7800X3D and in gaming performance? Why? Why is this happening? Well, obviously the L3 cache is helping in games, but this chart here shows why it's faster in everything else. It is able to hold a higher boost clock than the previous generation. The Ryzen 7 7800X3D in blue hovers around 4.8 gigahertz on an all-core frequency while it's being pushed in Cinebench. This just shows an all-core multi-threaded workload, and you can see 4.8 gigahertz previously. While on the new CPU with the cache flipped, we now see that the frequency is getting close to 5.1 gigahertz. It's about 5.05. It's right in the middle there, right about, right under 5.1 gigahertz. And that is consistent. The down spikes you see are the switches when Cinebench changes scenes and renders everything and then starts the next rendering of that scene. So you can ignore those. But what you'll see is that it is a consistent frequency throughout a 10-minute run. It never drops in frequency. It does not have a slow decline, and it stays much higher than the previous generation 7800X3D. This allows it to get much higher performance, especially in multi-core, multi-threaded workloads. So looking at the CPU package power, this is again running the Cinebench for 10 minutes. And we can see here that the 7800X3D, it was around 88 watts CPU package power, even though the TDP is 120 watts. Why? Because it can't sustain a higher clock speed. However, the 9800X3D can, and we actually see it reaching near its PPT or socket power. Socket power is about 162 watts on the CPU. Even though the TDP is 120, the socket power is 162 watts. So the 9800X3D is reaching its potential in power. It's utilizing that power that it inherently has. The 7800X3D has that same power profile. They inherently have that potential in them. The 9800X3D is able to achieve that, whereas the 7800X3D was not, which allows the higher boost clocks and better performance. When we look at the gaming power, it is a little bit different. It's not going to pull as much power while gaming as it does if you're doing like a Blender or Cinebench workload. So again, we see the 7800X3D reaching around 85 watts, coming very close to what it achieves during multi-core performance. The 9800X3D, it's around 123 watts. So that's less than 9900X, 285K, 14600K, all of those CPUs underneath it. It's definitely more power efficient and delivering way better gaming performance while gaming for this amount of power. So again, it's faster than all of those CPUs and utilizing that much less power compared to those CPUs while gaming, which is the efficiency gain that we look for. This is while gaming. If we look at the total system power, this is from the wall, we're getting about 261 watts on the 9800X3D, which is again, less power than running a 9900X, for even a 14600K, and the 285K Arrow Lake CPUs, just a whole lot less power from the wall, but yet so much faster in gaming, so much faster. CPU temperature. Now that has gone up a little bit on the CPU, 85.5, but it is obviously not a temperature to worry about. It is still well under 90C, and this is, you know, pushing all cores as hard as possible. This is like a multi-core workload, and those frequencies are running higher. It's not way far off from what the 7800X3D was running at. It's about on par with maybe a little bit warmer than the 7950X3D, but it's delivering so much more performance. But the temperatures, they're fine. While gaming, it's about the same temperature, and this is the important part since it's a gaming CPU, about the same temperatures here. But again, the temperatures, that doesn't matter as much. It's all about the performance, it's all about the wattage, and it is pulling more wattage, but it's utilizing that wattage. And actually, if we go back here and look at the wattage, there's something to note here. There is actually more headroom in the CPU. So it's not at its maximum PPT or socket power here. At 156 watts, it's actually shy of 162. There's headroom on this CPU to actually push the power further and overclock it. And in fact, AMD has said these CPUs are very overclockable. So this is an enthusiast feature. And not only is this a gaming CPU for enthusiasts, but this is also a CPU that can be tweaked and pushed further, allowing gamers and enthusiasts to actually have fun with the CPU. And there appears to be headroom for that. All right, let's wrap this up. And here it is again, the AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D for $479. And I think what I take away the most from these benchmarks and from using this CPU is that it is a no compromise CPU. And by that I mean the previous generations of the X3D parts, the 7800X3D and the 5800X3D, you were sacrificing a little bit of productivity performance in multi-core and single-core, single-thread performance a little bit on the CPU. You were sacrificing that for the improved gaming performance, which it had. They both have in spades. The 5800X3D is the GOAT CPU. It is still going strong today. 7800X3D improved a lot over that, and now we are seeing another improvement in a couple of different ways with the 9800X3D. You no longer have to make that sacrifice with productivity, because we do way more than just play games on our computers. You use your computer for office type work, whether it be Word, Excel, those type of things, whether it be web browsing, whether it be web-based applications, things that you access. We do those things, or it could be rendering. Maybe you do Blender stuff. Maybe you do, hey, maybe you're a streamer or a Let's Player and you record a bunch of video and do encoding of video and transcoding, and you need a lot of performance there, or video editing. There's a lot of things we do with our computer besides gaming, and it makes sense to have a computer that can do both of those things. Well, with the 9800X3D, it can do those other things besides gaming a whole lot better now, whereas the previous two generation of CPUs, the 7800X3D and 5800X3D, were a little bit slower than their counterparts from that generation without the X3D, without the 3D V-cache. But it's not the case with the 9800X3D. Our benchmarks show quite clearly there is a multi-core, multi-thread performance uplift, even though it has the same core count as a 9700X, and definitely very large over the 7800X3D. So if you're doing lots of things, lots of multitasking on your computer, you can have that performance with this CPU. In fact, the 9800 part of the 9800X3D, it rings true. It really does, because it is faster than the 9700X CPU. 9800 faster than the 9700. So the naming actually works this time around, because if you want the best multi-core, multi-threading performance, then the 9800X3D is going to be faster than a 9700X. And on top of that, you gain the advantage of having the 3D V-cache for just simply no argument, the fastest CPU on the planet for gaming. So you get the best of both worlds with that. You get a CPU that's faster in multi-thread, multi-core performance and faster in gaming. And it is also no slouch in single-core performance. Every now and then, depending on the workload, it could be just a little bit slower than a 9700X, but we're talking at most we saw a 5% difference. So 5%, we can call that practically the same. That's still very impressive. It's really that multi-core, multi-thread performance you don't have to sacrifice anymore. And then on top of that, as we saw with the gaming, just blows the competition out of the water. There is no competition. It just doesn't exist with this chip. In fact, it even blew the previous generation 7800X3D out. I mean, we're talking like 10% faster on average, maybe. Now, some games will be more or less. We saw up to like 25% in one game. So some games will probably have more. Some will have less. But even if you're on the less side, the lowest we saw was a 6% advantage. So that's still an advantage. And we think that it will have a greater advantage and show a greater divide between the CPUs when the next generation of GPUs come out. Imagine the next generation like RTX 5090, for example. That is when we will see even more separation. As GPUs get faster, the 9800X3D will be able to pull its weight even more, and we should see it actually start to be more ahead of the 7800X3D than we're seeing now with a RTX 4090. So that's something to keep in mind. This is a CPU that, much like the 5800X3D, over time will age very well and may even see a bigger difference in the future as faster GPUs come about, and new different games as well could change things up, and this CPU could be the next GOAT CPU from AMD for gaming, just like the 5800X3D was. This could be going down that same path. It has the potential. I'm not going to say that it is right now, but it has the potential to be. And so I'm excited about that and to see where it goes. But really, the whole focus of our review today was to give you a balanced review of the CPU, to show you that the CPU, in our experience and in our testing, is definitely the king of gaming. We kind of expected that, but it's also no slouch now for everything else. Productivity, it's no slouch for any of that. That means you don't have to sacrifice that performance anymore. You can use this CPU as your primary main rig, and you can use that primary main rig for work and play. Work and play, and you don't have to worry about lower performance with the work part anymore. And all this really does also is make us really excited to see what happens with other parts that may be coming down. Maybe a 16-core part, 9950X3D, something like that. That would be kind of exciting. We'll have to see how that turns out. But this flip of the V-cache, the 3D V-cache, putting it on the underside of the CCD, seems to have been worked out really well for AMD. This was exactly what the CPU needed to really push its frequency higher. And I am glad that they were able to improve upon 3D V-cache. Here is us thinking there is no way that you could improve on 3D V-cache. Just put more of it, right? That's the common thought. Just add more of it. But no, who would have thought? Flipping it under, such a big increase in the core frequencies. That's pretty amazing. So if they have achieved this with second gen 3D V-cache, it makes you excited for the future and how else it could evolve. I can't even think of where that would go, but it is pretty exciting, I do have to say. 3D V-cache on everything, I say. Throw it on everything. Put it on all the cores. That's what I have to say. I mean, it is just so beneficial. It helps gaming, and there's some theory that it might also be alleviating some of the latency and bottlenecking of the memory controller that's on the I/O die in these CPUs. Perhaps this 3D V-cache is a layer of cache that is actually reducing latency and problems or bottlenecks that are with the memory controller that is being used on Zen 5 architecture CPUs, because it is using the same memory controller from Zen 4. It's just the cores that are all different at Zen 5, but it's the same memory controller. So current theory could be perhaps that this 3D V cache is also helping with latency issues there and is part of the reason why we are getting an increase. I just wanted to bring that concept and idea up in case that is actually what's happening. There's a theory on that as well. So maybe it's all of those things combined. Frequency, the memory controller, latency issues, all of these combined, and this 3D V cache is just the magic thing. It's the magic bean, and it seems to be working. That's all I can say. It seems to be working. The 9800X3D is definitely a chip to be reckoned with, and the competition should be scared. Absolutely. Improvements in that area need to be made for competition's sake. But this 9800X3D from AMD, what else can I say about it? It's proved to be an extremely good CPU, and I want to do more with it. I want to throw a lot more games at it and really push it and see how that turns out. That could be quite fun and interesting. But this is a fun launch because it is a gaming CPU that gamers can be excited about. It's a CPU that you don't have to sacrifice that productivity performance, and it is a CPU for enthusiasts who want to do overclocking and want to tweak and push things further. This CPU has that capability to do a various number of things with it that should bring joy to any hardware enthusiast. So there you go, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this summary review of our 9800X3D review. Make sure to check out our written review in the link below on our website. And I hope you all have a very blessed day. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.